I'd love to introduce you to this man who I have had the privilege to get to know virtually. This is my very first time meeting him in person today. And it's a treasure to have you here. Like it's really, really special to have you here with us. Anthony Pico served as the chairman of the Viajes Band of Kumeyaay Indians for 26 years. He is nationally recognized as an authority and leader on American Indian sovereignty, self-governance, Indian gaming, and tribal economic development. Anthony has numerous international, national, state, and regional awards for leadership achievement, business, and as a humanitarian. Anthony has been researching what he considers the most important and profound issue facing Native Americans today, childhood trauma. His passionate research has been a healing journey for himself, and he hopes the beginning of a healing journey for our people through awareness of childhood trauma, how it affects us as adults, and what we can do to eliminate this trauma that almost all Native Americans suffer from today. Anthony has an Associates of Arts degree from Grossmont College, where in 2000 he received the honor of Outstanding Alumni. Yeah. He has an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from Long Island University, New York. And Anthony is very proud of his military record, where he served in Vietnam as an Army paratrooper in the infantry, where he received several distinguished service medals. He has 2 sons of whom he is very proud, John Eagle Spirit Elliott, who is currently serving his 20th year as tribal councilman of the Manzanita tribe of Kumeyaay Indians, and Tommy Pico, who writes and is the story editor for 3 television programs, Reservation Dogs. Yes, I know, thank you, people who've seen it. Resident Alien and Rutherford Falls. He has authored 4 books on poetry and is the recipient of the 2018 Whiting Award. Please welcome Chairman Anthony Pico.
I'm very excited to be here this afternoon with you. And excited because of people who are planning careers as social workers. It was always my dream, or my fantasy, if you will, that all tribal chair people have a degree in social work. As we know, oftentimes what we were doing is, let's train people to be lawyers and they can be our chair people. But as I've learned more about historical, intergenerational, and childhood trauma, I realize that the best people that need to be in the leadership position are people who really understand our dilemma, that really understand our pain and our suffering, people that are highly empathetic, that will help bring us to a place of healing. If you plan a career as a social worker, you will have an amazing ability to help people in pain. And we on the reservations have a lot of pain. My thanks to today's organizers, San Diego State University, the Indigenous Social Work Alliance, and the Warrior Spirit family. It's an honor to have been invited to speak. And I've been asked to give some insight into working with American Indians as your clients. With all due respect, especially to my Native brothers and sisters that are in the audience, I realize that only you can tell your story. I believe that exchanges of personal stories is the best therapy. And I would seriously recommend a session where you can share your feelings and experience with your colleagues, inviting a discussion between peers, American Indians and non-Indians, that are candidates for social work degrees. to share their personal life traumas is the best way to know our hearts. First thing I want you to understand is that there isn't like just one Indian or one Indian tribe or group, but people as diverse in our beliefs and lifestyles as other Americans. There are citizens of tribally governed reservations and urban Indians who are either not a citizen of their tribe or believe that there would be more opportunities living off the reservation. There are Indians that you might consider well-to-do because the tribe has an economic base. And there are Indians that are challenged because the foundation, some of the foundation anyway, of America is in financial resources. In many cases, casino gaming lifted tribes that were destitute and living in poverty to a place where we could be able to make choices. There are Catholic Indians as well as following other Christian and native spiritual faiths. Not all tribes are rich or corrupt, and rich Indian casino owners, per the new myth. In fact, across the nation, when it comes to gaming, many tribal casinos really don't make a whole lot of money. They make a few bucks to maintain the facility, offer a few jobs, and keep the tribal government doors open. Casino gaming has created a bit of a cultural divide. Money does and has made a difference on my reservation, the Viejas Band of Kumeyaay. People have well-paying jobs, health insurance, you can hire teachers, recreational specialists, therapists, and most importantly, we can breathe. What do I mean by that? I'm saying that we don't have to spend every day stressing over survival. We're not drowning out our problems by fighting each other in booze and drugs, even though we do have a very serious drug problem on my reservation. Grounded with steady income, we can finally begin to lift our heads high enough to visualize a plan for a better future. I may add that a spiritual awareness is also imperative. Each tribe is free as a sovereign government to decide what a better future looks like. For some, it's more commercial investments, more money. For others, it's seeking a path of our ancestors as a way to heal and separate the voice of the colonist from the voice of the Creator, our Creator. However, from my perspective and working with tribal leaders from every corner of the country, I believe American Indians share many things in common with non-Indians. We really aren't that different from most human beings. We want to love and be loved, raise a family, have a secure income, own a nice car, or at least one that runs, and hell, maybe even a boat. We all want to find a place where we feel supported and share common cultural beliefs and traditions, from the Catholic Church to the Native American Church. The difference is context, the history, and how differently Indians have been viewed and treated historically, and the ways European history, culture, and values have nearly destroyed us. As a result of that history, there are many differences. The original crime was that our ancestors were neither Catholic nor white and did not understand the European practice of attaching a commercial value to anything from land to human slavery. Today, American Indians have dual citizenships and dual loyalties as citizens of a tribal nation and citizens of the United States. You will find that this causes dueling identities and being haunted by who we were before the colonists came and changed everything. It's like an adopted child searching for her real parents in order to know who she is. There are choices and great sacrifices Indian people have had to make between our tribal identity and identifying with the country that stole our land and homes, took Indian children from their homes and placed them in Indian boarding schools, where everything Indian was to be removed, even if it meant ending their lives, our lives. The popular quote was, "Kill the Indian and save the man." So, I'm going to tell you just a few of the inhumane acts against California Indians for which European invaders were responsible. Acts which were registered on the soul and the psyche of Indians and which still resonate on our consciousness as intergenerational trauma. It's this original reaction to the crimes committed against our ancestors that is passed along from generation to generation that continues crippling Indian people in so many ways. And you as social workers, you'll find all those ways. The colonists have tried to ignore, erase, or kill us by state and federal legislation since California became a state in 1850. Tribes were registered with the federal government as mission Indians. With the swipe of a pen, the United States officials, our unique and true identities were just wiped away. This is also true of the Kumeyaay, who lived below the new border between the United States and Mexico. The name Mission Indians comes from the idea we were found or thought to belong in a twisted way to the missions and not our own lands or our own clans. We've been given many names that we just didn't choose, along with the many negative descriptions of Indians from ignorant and primitive to brutal savages and devil worshippers. The clans existing before arrival of the missionaries called themselves, north of the San Diego River, Ipai, while southern tribes like Viejas were Tipai, meaning people. The early Spanish named us Degueño after our location as subjects of the San Diego mission. A common name they gave us was Diggers, was popular. That was in my third grade textbook. I remember feeling so ashamed when that happened. I just wanted to crawl under my chair or get out of that room. I would like to comment about our experiences with America, beginning with the Treaty of Guadalupe Delgado. Signed in 1848, it was a treaty that ended the American war with Mexico, secured the territory of California to the United States, and declared war on California Indians. The American-Mexican Treaty had one obvious and consequential oversight: our Indian people. The land's rights to American citizenship and private holdings of Mexican citizens were protected and reserved. We, on the other hand, were ignored as inconsequential or non-existent. Colonization is about erasing us not just from history, but as human beings. California Territory applied and received statehood in 1850. With the birth of the new state, entering the Union as a non-slave state, continuing to enslave Indians wasn't seen as a conflict. Worse yet was the state's stated goal to murder Indians. California's first interim governor, Peter Burnett, a former slave owner and racist, proclaimed an official state policy of killing Indians, who were declared obstacles to the state's progress and attractiveness to immigrants. Context. A reservation is land set aside but owned by the federal government, which is held in trust for Indians from an American legal perspective. It's not technically our land. You probably didn't know that every 25 years, a United States president signs a document recommitting to reserving trust land for Indians. The context of the word reservation first came from the California solution to the Indian problem and was later applied to all treaty tribes. Many, including Indians, viewed reservations as concentration camps. Other humane non-Indians believed that it was the only way to save California Indians from extinction. Reservations created by presidential order came without rights given to treaty tribes for many years. Also in 1850, California passed the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians. This act, ostensibly to help Indians, was actually meant to further oppress and subjugate. Provisions of the act included the following. Non-Indians and Indians could make complaints before a justice of the peace, and I quote, "However, in no case shall a white man be convicted of any offense upon testimony of an Indian." Can you imagine how someone felt during that time? And somebody came in and didn't know who he was, some white guy, and lied and said that the land that this native person was on was his land. It was his water. So the Indian, understanding that if he goes to the justice of the peace, they can get some relief, hopefully. But to go in front of the justice of the peace, and he finds out that his testimony doesn't mean anything. It's against the law for he to testify as a witness to a crime committed upon he and his family. In other words, if a non-Indian were to commit a crime such as murder, rape, or theft, the only witness were Indians, then no conviction would be possible. I can't tell you how many times I felt, how did that person feel? How did they feel? Maybe walking into the courthouse with some kind of hope, and then having to walk out with nothing that he understood of, except maybe his spiritual understanding. Curtailed Indian land rights, like settlers stealing land and Indian homes, who lied about it and got away with it due to the fact that local agents and sheriffs supported and also engaged in the same type of thievery. Allowed non-Indians to obtain Indian children by going before the justice of the peace and securing a certificate which allowed them to have care, custody, control, and earnings of these children. In other words, this act opened the door to involuntary servitude of Indians, both children and adults, a form of slavery in a non-slave state. Hello. Early flyers advertising free California real estate for homesteading also advertised free Indian labor. The state's first bond measure here in California for $400,000 provided guns, ammo for the state's voluntary militia, as well as a bounty rewards for body parts or a dead Indian as proof of kill. By some estimates, California spent over $1 million killing Indians. The discovery of gold in Mendocino County in 1850 led to the onslaught of hungry immigrants and foreign criminals seeking riches. The Europeans fled a class system of rule by the church, monarchies, and feudal lords, but created another class system based on race, religion, and wealth. Christian churches added to the belief that wealth was only given to the deserving by God. The undeserving, always Indians, according to the Calvinistic faith, were fated to be poor and enslaved. Historians believe the major cause of depopulation California Indians was the result of death by diseases, which we had no immunity. There were periodic epidemics of smallpox and measles right here in this county, in San Diego County. In addition, Indian mortality came from starvation caused by a loss of land and being deprived of natural food resources, as well as the breakdown of our religious, social, governmental foundations and institutions, and of course, genocide. The Indian population estimated to be 300,000 to several million statewide prior to European invasion plummeted in San Diego to 3,000 in 1770 to 800 in 1910. Where did they all go? Some people would ask that question. Where did they go? You may have heard of the saying that in Indian country that the white man broke every treaty he made, and it's true, and speaks of how the dominating culture felt about tribal sovereignty and the total lack of integrity and humanity exhibited when it came to Indians, our people. The usual cause of treaty breaking was a conflict over economic expansion and appropriation of natural resources sought by European immigrants and their elected officials who desired to generate wealth through population growth and commerce. One local example is the Lake Cuyamaca, right here in our county, that reservoir. Also built on Kumeyaay land, and El Capitan Grande, the original reservation home of the Viejas and Barona bands of Kumeyaay and Mission Indians. So here's the context. San Diego experienced a drought in the 1900s. The city, which also needed more water for its expanding immigrant population, decided land on the El Capitan Reservation was the perfect location to capture and store water for the San Diego River. Only one problem. The proposed site was on Kumeyaay Reservation land. City leaders and water officials sought federal authority to confiscate the land, which was granted in 1919. The El Capitan Act, which was passed by Congress over the opposition of Indians, transferred our water rights and land to the city of San Diego in exchange for resettlement elsewhere as a payment of $362,000 by the city. The initial act covered only the relocation of people and livestock in the reservoir flood zone, but later was extended to much of the watershed above the El Capitan flood zone, forcing removal of my village, Los Conejos, above the water line in order to protect water quality. They figured we were going to dirty all the water. What they really wanted was more land. When Congress, supposedly protectors of tribal sovereignty and reservations, sided with the city, our land was flooded, burying an entire village, church, school, homes underwater. Our people dug up the cemetery and placed the remains of families and ancestors in tin cans before evacuating so that they might rebury them. The tribal tradition that we never leave our deceased family and ancestors discarded or forgotten, but rather keep them near and honored. For 80 years, we've been honoring the remains of those people that were dug up from El Capitan Indian Reservation. With the nominal amount of money we were reimbursed for the El Capitan giveaway, Kumeyaay clans bought land adjacent to the original reservation. The people who chose to move to Barona Reservation were a little bit better off than us. They found land with homes supplied for them adjacent to our homeland to buy immediately. Those of us who formed Viejas were not so fortunate. It was only the goodwill of Mr. Baronlong, owner of a horse ranch in Alpine, that we were able to acquire the Baronlong land that became the Viejas Reservation. This came after a battle with locals in Alpine who didn't want, and I quote, dirty, thieving, uncivilized Indians living in their community, unquote. When we moved to the ranch, there wasn't enough housing or water or access to food. And these conditions, along with the trauma and reality of being forced from their homes, caused early death of many Viejas elders. I remember looking at the records when I was first elected chairman in 1983. It was so sad to see all these older people dying. And looking previously, how many older people were dying. Not a whole lot of them, few of them. But then when we moved to Viejas, a whole bunch of people, older people died. The people of Alpine condemned us for being poor, outcast and marginalized citizens. The irony is, the actions of the colonizers created the very situations and disinformation of Indians' context that forced us to live a life shaped by their greed and propaganda. Indians didn't graduate from county high schools until after the 1950s because teachers thought us too dumb to invest in. Now we honor our students for every educational accomplishment, including new records of high school and college graduations. We today, for a very small tribe, have 17 students attending colleges and universities as I speak. As late as the 1950s, Alpine schools segregated water fountains and restrooms. One for Indians and one for white people. My cousin, former chairwoman Daisy Welch, used to laugh about the fact that the Indian restrooms were clean while the others were filthy. As a kindergartner, I remember going to school when we had different restrooms, different water fountains. It was verboten for us to drink out of the water fountain that a white man drank out of, or a white kid. The list of real grievances also included theft of 9 million acres of land set aside for California Indians. Starving and marginalizing Indians by stealing valuable resources was a given. I'm going to give you an overview of California's ethnic cleansing of Indians so that you can understand why the trauma of that time continues to be passed from one generation to the next. This added insult to our psychics and the continued racism and negative stereotypes that have never been challenged is an almost unbearable test of human resilience. When historians claim that California tribes suffered the most from European rule, they're correct. You can find in grisly detail every act of murder against 3 or more Indians cataloged by author Benjamin Madley in his book, An American Genocide. Any of you working on Indian reservations need to read that book here in California, what happened. So you can be more sensitive, you understand where much of our trauma comes from. He has posted a chart detailing every act on the internet and also anyone who's interested. What is different about Madley's book are the personal details of each of the murders. It's really hard reading. I cried when I read this book, and it took me about a year to get through it. It was so painful. If I wasn't advanced in age and had a little bit more wisdom, I probably would have went on the warpath. The tally is relentlessly grim. A whole settlement wiped out in Trinity County, excepting a few children. An Indian girl raped and left to die somewhere near Mendocino. As many as 50 killed at Goose Lake, and 2 months later, as many as 257 murdered at Grouse Creek, scores of them women and children. There were the 4 white ranchers who tracked down a band of Yana to a cave, butchering 30. In the cave with the meat were some Indian children, reported a Chronicle publisher, published later. One of the whites could not bear to kill these children with his .56 caliber Spencer rifle. It tore them up so bad, so he did it with a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. I remember reading that there was $5 paid for heads, 25 cents paid for a scalp. And you could turn those into the state and you would get your money. And the federal government would reimburse the state for that. Then they started saying that they could use hands. As being a former military person, I know what all this stuff means. I know what a 50 caliber bullet means and what it can do to a human being. What probably happened was they shot some Indian and the whole body just exploded. So they went around and got the hands. Because maybe there wasn't a scalp and there wasn't a head or a face. But there were hands that could turn in and make money. There have been books written about systematic slaughter of California Indians, but none as gruesomely thorough as Benjamin Madley's, from which the above accounts came. He estimated that between 9,000 and 16,000 Indians, though probably many more, were killed by vigilantes, state militiamen, and federal soldiers between 1846 and 1873 in what he calls an organized destruction of the state's largely peaceful indigenous people. I calculated the death toll using conservative estimates, Madley explained. I did not want to be accused of exaggeration. His book shows that the intent to rid California of its indigenous inhabitants was openly and repeatedly voiced, and that the means to achieve these ends were unambiguously brutal: mass deportation, slavery, massacres. He argues that what happened to California Indians, according to most widely accepted definition of genocide, not all that different from what happened to Jews, Armenians, and Rwandans. The debate over genocide in Native American history often turns to California, where the Native population fell dramatically from about 150,000 to 30,000 in the middle decades of the 19th century. It has since rebounded so that California has the largest Native population in the United States today, with over 723,000 Indians, including many who belong to the state's 110 federally recognized tribes. The state is a microcosm of Indian country. And it is there, many believe, that manifest destiny culminated in the only way possible, with historians Robert Hine and John Farquhar calling it, and I quote, the clearest case of genocide in the history of the American frontier. Madley had grown up around Indians. His father had been a psychotherapist on the California-Oregon border, working with the Kuruk people there. So he knew that California Indians did not wear war bonnets and that they were the regalia of the Plains tribes. He spent the next decade trying to compile a record of every single act of deadly violence perpetrated against Native Americans, people of California during the gold rush and its aftermath. Although the resources were scattered, they were plainly available in state and federal archives, as well as in university libraries from Berkeley, California to Hanover, New Hampshire. There was no attempt to conceal what was done to the Indians of California: a massacre, a lynching, and a whole killing campaign. These things were hidden in plain sight. Madley found that the murders acted under the sanction of the state and the federal government. Feelings of racial superiority were deployed to justify the killings. Greed supplied the sense of urgency. California statehood in 1850 came 2 years after the discovery of gold. This was also a decade when the slaughter reached a crescendo. 300,000 came seeking gold. It happened that many of the gold fields in Northern California lay in the ancestral lands of, like the Kuruk, Wintu, and Miwok, all of which remain in California, diminished survivors of an unwholesome act. It was widely held belief in 19th century California that all of the Indians had to be exterminated, reported the Daily Alta California. Whites are becoming, and I quote, Whites are becoming impressed with the belief that it will be absolutely necessary to exterminate the savages before they can labor much longer in the mines with security. They went to work in the mines for security so they wouldn't be murdered. The killing of Indians was performed for reasons that seem today pathetically feeble. Madley describes how one vigilante gang called the California Blades set about destroying the Nisenan villages over several missing mules. The United States Army often participated in mass killing, making Capitol Hill complicit in what was happening in the gold fields of the Sierra Nevada and elsewhere in California. In the winter of 1849, Indians wanted freedom, killed Andrew Kelsey and Charles Stone, two slavers of what is today Lake County. In revenge, federal infantry and cavalry detachments attacked a village at Clear Lake. On May 15, 1850, they poured destructive fire indiscriminately upon men, women, and children. According to one account, as many as 800 members of the Pomo tribe were killed at what has become known today as Bloody Island. It took them 4 or 5 days to gather up the dead, one survivor remembered. A village of Yokayas on the Russian River was attacked by United States troops just days later in what their commander deemed, and I quote, a perfect slaughtering pen, unquote. Ukiah casualties may have been as high as 100. United States troops lost no men, though 2 suffered wounds. Much of the slaughter was carried out by the state's militia, which enjoyed financial support from both Sacramento and Washington, D.C. In Round Valley, north of San Francisco, the Eel River Rangers were so prolific in their murder of the Yuki that even some white observers became alarmed. And I quote, "The killing of Indians is a daily occurrence," reported California's head of Indian Affairs. And again, I quote, if some means be not speedily devised by which the unauthorized expeditions that are constantly out in search of them can be restrained, they will soon be exterminated. Whole tribal nations were exterminated. One of the killers sent a bill to California for $11,143 worth $350,000 today. The state paid it nearly in full. Madley notes that the $1.5 million and $48 million today that the California spent 24 different Indian killing militia campaigns between 1850 and 1861. Congress paid the state back all but $200,000. There was good money to be made in California after the gold rush. The gold rush and the years that followed may have marked the bloodiest period of white-Indian relations, but there was plenty of cruelty before and after. Mexicans ceded control of California to the United States in 1846, which is why Madley begins an American genocide in that year and ends it in 1873 with the Modoc War, which concluded with 4 Modoc leaders hanged, beheaded, their heads sent to the Army Medical Museum in Washington, D.C. But that hardly meant the suffering was over for Indians. In California and elsewhere in the United States, reservations were established in the 19th century, and the conditions were so brutal, Adolf Hitler is said to have used them in part as a blueprint for his final solution. On the Round Valley Reservation, Native Americans were getting only between 160 and 390 calories a day from federal officials as part of what Madley calls institutionalized starvation conditions. 80 years later, the daily ration for prisoners of Auschwitz was 1,300 calories. Madley concludes an American genocide with a discussion of place names, which he says raised awkward questions. He went on to say, if we spurned the names of Robert E. Lee, why do we accept that of John C. Fremont? Don't red lives matter as much as black ones? If we call it genocide, then something has to be done, he said. We have to speak about it. We need to remember it. We need to memorialize it. And we need to teach it. This is what Madley argued. I would add one more thing. We need to feel it. We need to feel it. And that's why your empathetic training is so, so important. Why is something so ugly important? Why don't we just put it behind us? Save the agony. Because Indians can't forget it. And the resulting impact is one of the reasons American Indians score higher than any other group on the 10 risk factors of ACEs. Adverse childhood experiences. I assume most of you probably know about that, being with Tamara, so you won't let you forget it. So what is ACEs? In case you aren't familiar with the study, ACEs are potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood up to 0 to 18 years. For example, experiencing violence, abuse, or neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, having a family member attempt or die by suicide. Also included are aspects of the child's environment that can undermine their sense of safety, stability, and bonding, such as growing up in a household with substance use problems, mental health problems, instability due to parental separation, household members being in jail and prison, incarcerated. Please note, the examples above are not complete list of adverse experiences. Many other traumatic experiences could impact health and well-being. ACEs can have lasting negative effects on health, well-being, as well as life opportunities such as education and job potential. These experiences can increase the risks of injury, sexually transmitted infections, maternal and child health problems, including teen pregnancy, and their complications, and fetal death involving in sex trafficking and murdered Indigenous women. Leading causes of death such as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and suicide. I know this firsthand because I lost my wife last year because of breast cancer, who grew up with a lot of childhood trauma. ACEs and associated social detriments of health, such as living in under-resourced and radically separated neighborhoods and Indian reservations, frequently moving and experiencing food insecurity, can cause toxic stress. This is extended or prolonged stress. Toxic stress from ACEs can negatively affect children's brain development, immune systems, and stress response systems. And these changes can affect the child's attention, decision-making, and learning. But I want to say here, too, that our brains, the child's brain, is highly malleable. This can be changed with unconditional love. Unconditionally love yourself first, then you'll be able to unconditionally love the families that you're going to be dealing with. Growing up with toxic stress may have difficulty among healthy and stable relationships. They may also have unstable work histories as adults and struggle with finances, jobs, and depression throughout life. These effects can also be passed on to their own children. Some children may face further exposure of toxic stress from historical and ongoing traumas due to systematic racism or the impacts of poverty resulting from limited educational and economic opportunities, like what is happening in some of our public school systems. For example, Valley Center High School District in northern San Diego County, and Viejas, where this bullying is starting to raise its ugly head again. When I went to school 71 years ago, where they're calling our kids sand niggers, indigenous dirt, derogatory statements about kids' sexual orientation. On my reservation, we don't put kids through that, of making remarks of their sexual orientation. They are accepted. So let me repeat. Some children may face further exposure to toxic stress from historical and ongoing traumas due to systematic racism and the impacts of poverty, resulting from limited education, safety, and economic opportunities. If nothing else from today, I want you to remember this sentence as an apt description of contemporary American Indians. California Indians were not poor until Europeans came. Our poverty, our public curses, ignorance, and drunkenness was imposed on us. Finally, I would like to point out some of the obstacles in learning the trust of American Indians that you face as future social workers. The buy-in or Stockholm syndrome, which is identifying with your abductors as in criminal kidnapping. Native people have had our identities kidnapped so much it's hard to know who we are. Many American Indians have unconsciously adopted the ugly stereotypes of themselves. We are failures. We're not too bright, not capable of competing or flourishing in American society. It's always our fault when something goes wrong. We are nothing but drunks and troublemakers. After all the years and support of the government, we still can't get it right. Indians cannot and will not get along or agree on anything regardless of its importance. We are self-destructive, as one Indian said about himself to another. In a cruel exchange of fate, Indians have taken on the worst the Europeans the Europeans claimed about indigenous people as part of our self-worth and identity. When there's the trust issue, why, I ask, would we trust or like non-Indians? Non-Indians are often surprised and hurt to find out how Indians feel about them. I can't imagine being that ignorant of the country's relationships with Native Americans. But then few, except academics and some Indians, know the harsh reality of the American experience as it applies to us. Indians don't like being asked questions in public because they feel that they are being set up to look stupid. And it's because we fear we are stupid. Something we learned in school, something I learned in school. I remember as a child growing up, I think maybe I was in the 4th grade, and it occurred to me that in my 4th grade class, I was no longer the dumbest kid in the classroom. I was second to the dumbest. Just to think about what my understanding was then and my resilience, I came home to my mom terribly excited. Mom, guess what? I'm not the dumbest in the class anymore. David Beach is. To me, that was the greatest victory. It just filled my self-esteem. I haven't changed since then. Then there's the trust issue. Why, I ask, would we trust or like non-Indians? Non-Indians are often surprised and hurt to find out how. We are sometimes unique to the world and a bit of an American oxymoron. Indians, according to American courts, are dependent sovereigns. We are sovereign, and sometimes we aren't. An example is the removal of the Cherokees from the southern lands to Oklahoma by President Andrew Jackson. It's a tragic story, well told in the book, The Trail of Tears. The Supreme Court sided with the Cherokees and said the state of Georgia has no right to encroach on the land of the Cherokee. President Andrew Jackson, siding with the citizens of Georgia, said John Marshall made the decision, let him enforce the non-encroachment of Georgians. And President Andrew Jackson then forcefully removed the Cherokees to Oklahoma. There are probably close to 1,000 tribal nations prior to foreign invasion of tribal lands. Americans still can't get how there can be 500 plus registered tribal nations as part of one nation of America. The other hard pill to swallow for Americans is that the courts have declared as a sovereign tribal nation with multiple clans, a tribal government's authority exceeds or is at least equal to that of a state. The evidence is in plain sight when you look at the case of the United States Constitution, Article 5, Section 8, and the United States Supreme Court case, Cherokee versus Georgia. Tell that to the early Californians. Unfortunately, this is a very little known act, although the tribes and the courts are constantly refining where state authority versus tribal authority begins and ends. I didn't know this myself until California Indian gaming casino wars in the late 1990s to 2008. Sadly, California Office of Attorney General, the governor, the state legislature, and local governments weren't aware of this fact either. As dependent, sovereign tribal governments recognized by the United States have all the rights of state government and some of the federal government's authority over such things as citizenship. What makes us dependent is that the United States Congress and the President alone have the power to restrict or advance sovereignty on reservations. The courts may interpret which may affect outcomes, but they don't set policy for tribal nations. If the United States Congress and the President alone can restrict our sovereignty, I am so grateful that Donald Trump did not get elected president. And I'm telling you, if he does, we're in trouble. Naively, I once believed that the courts to be objective and fair to the tribes. That was until our attorneys enlightened us. And I began to experience the sovereignty experiment in real time. Congress has limited sovereignty by denying tribal nations the authority to make treaties with foreign powers or declare war. Indian law is considered the most complex, not only in America, but the world. In a grab bag of wins and losses, a big difference where tribal rights came when the government funded attorneys to represent us and establish tribal courts. This, along with the tribal police on reservations, allowed California tribes to finally have some authority over our reservations and handle our own internal legal issues. So why is sovereignty important for dealing with American Indian clients? I suppose because it's seen by Indians as the Holy Grail, the avenue for Indians to recapture our freedom and self-reliance. And because when dealing with Indians or tribes, the psychic wounds come from loss of freedom and self-sufficiency. The bottom line is, if you are going to be dealing with American Indians in your career, you should get to know our real history, not the European version. Understand the causes of trauma on reservations and have a long conversation with American Indian colleague, tribal elder, or youth about the past and the future. I hope this helps, and I wish you all the best. The world desperately needs people trained in empathy. Social workers free of prejudice based on poverty, color, creed, or sex and history can make a real difference on reservations. Our past has been full of unspeakable atrocities. But I'm telling you, I am going to see some real goodness and spiritual understanding before I die. I've seen it start to happen. I mean, we planted the seed about 35 years ago. But in the last 10 years, I can see it coming. We are all going to be proud. This gathering right here this afternoon is evidence of it. Doesn't matter what color we are right now, we're all in love. That's why today is a spiritual experience for us. We don't have to go home like I used to do and then process it to figure out, hey, that's what happened, I guess. But now I know. I'm so glad that you're here. This is going to get more and more encouraging as we move along. And it happens because of you. It's happening because of you. It's happening because of you. It's happening because of you. Because of your courage, your determination, and your resilience. Thank you.